Talofa, Maluelele, Kia ora, Kia ora ana, Xin Chao, that's for my husband, Woman Jeka, and good day. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bryony, or, I'm known as Oni to my family and friends. I'm a foundation member and a senior player of the Western District Women's Rugby team here out west. And so, as some of you might know, WD had planned to run a Youth Girls Forum a couple of weeks ago on the back of an incident that had occurred in Broombank. But due to COVID numbers and the increasing cases or confirmed cases that seem to be ravaging through our part of the world, we postponed the forum. So, and what we had hoped to do at that time was to have, a very frank, very open conversation with our youth girls and our younger players, just about some of the issues that they are living with and they have to grapple with on a day-to-day basis as Pacific Islanders living in a westernized society, or, more specifically within Australia. So unfortunately our forum was postponed. But what we thought we would do instead is, in the meantime, so that, the issues and what we had put out, or rather what we had intended to do, was still front of mind for a lot of our players, as that we thought we would move the format to a Zoom interview with one of our keynote speakers, or our guest speaker, Moana Leilua, who I'll bring into the conversation very shortly. But before we launch into today's conversation, or the topic of discussion, which will cover off on player welfare, just wanted to take the time to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome, Moana. So I think with our forum, Moana, and you had been a part of the planning, we were going to try and address three key issues, and I think where your expertise and what we were hoping to do on the day was have you just talk very openly about your role within the Rebels, and then try and always making those connections back to as a Pacific Islander woman, as a player, where some of those synergies lie, and how your role is quite pivotal to, or quite important to, and possibly where we can connect with our youth players. If you can tell us about yourself, what your playing history is, and also what your heritage is.
Awesome. Mo te whaatula watulu pa ia malmala fia sula sunga oni ai mai sira pa ia lasi o Melbourne nei o te whaatalo whaatu ma le ngang whaaloalo whawhitai o tātou whelua I manmanuia le alofo le atua whawhitai fo I o mawalo awanoa te whaasua atule nei aso o au o whaamoanga le lua ma lo le soifua mawa ma le langi mama. All of that to say that I am very blessed to have been given this opportunity just to share a little bit about not only myself but the work that I am currently doing here in Melbourne. So I am I'm Kiwi born, Samoan blood, and have recently moved to Australia, so I've been here 6 months. In terms of my playing history, so my current role is as the Player Wellbeing Development Manager for the Melbourne Rebels, which is one of the Super Rugby teams involved in the revised Super Rugby Comp Super Rugby Australia. And prior to all of this, I too was, like many of you, a rugby player. So I've had played rugby for well over 15 years. Started in club rugby in West Auckland while I was studying at university, and had played for a number of clubs, and also represented regionally for Auckland, both in the Auckland Storm and what they call now Auckland Bees, but what back then was Auckland Thunder. And had the real privilege to be able to adorn the royal blue for Marusina Samoa for 3 years, which I was really fortunate to be able to represent Samoa at the Rugby World Cup in Edmonton, Canada in 2006. So my playing history is quite far and wide, and it's I definitely wouldn't have thought that I'd be working in professional rugby in this capacity, but absolutely enjoying myself. And yeah, things are going really well. Yeah.
All right. Look, I think that's fantastic. And, what we always like to do for our girls is put up some, and perhaps it's not the best choice of words, but to put up some role models for them. So I think and yes, you might not have started here in Australia, but you're ours now. So I think for the time being, and I think it's always good to see that, for our players there are pathways as well. So it's not just the playing, and we'll get to your role with the Rebels as well. But also I know that you had done some work with was it in Auckland where you were managing the men's team as well. So I think, always we like to put up there that there are examples of women, Pacific Island women who are strong, who are proud, who are carving the pathways for them. So we start at club, but we also like to make sure that our girls can, fulfill their potential. I'm going to flick over to the next question if I can. And so bear with me while I read through this. So as you've said, you've represented the Manusina and you've come up playing through the New Zealand system. And now that you're here in Melbourne doing quite significant work and valuable work with the Rebels, one of the questions that we had hoped to discuss at the forum was to, based on your experience looking across the different environments you've been exposed to, seeing, what the challenges are for our Pacific Island players are across the different levels. So are you able to talk through that and, share with us your experience?
Yeah, for sure. I think that the main challenge is that we as Pacific Islanders managing expectations, both at home and then on the field. And especially for those that have got a number of commitments or obligations that they are involved in, whether it be with church, with family, and obviously sport is an outlet for most. And that for me was my way of being able to manage life at the time as a uni student playing rugby, is that it gave me exercise, but it also was something totally different from what I was involved in prior. So a lot of it, definitely is managing expectations and obligations, and balancing the home and life, especially if you've chosen to participate in a sport which you have to commit to. So if your commitment is there, obviously you'd have your 2 trainings a week and then game day, and then any other kind of get-togethers that you have during the week. So making sure that you do your hours at home, and that you do your studies if you're studying, and keeping on top of that. And then also, if you've made a commitment to a sport, not just rugby, but to a sport in general, that you are not spreading yourself thin. I think that will be the main thing. And in some cases, when I started, I wasn't driving, so transport was an issue. And I had moved away from home, so I was raised in Hamilton, Kirikiriroa and Waikato, and then moved up to Auckland. And so at that particular time, I wasn't driving. So I remember my first couple of club trainings when I moved to Marist, Auckland Marist, I caught 2 buses just to get to training. And so, there are opportunities now where some clubs actually provide transport for a lot of their young ones to be able to come to training. I think a lot of the onus was on the individual themselves back then to get to training. So for me, if it meant catching 2 buses, then so be it, because that's how driven I was and how I really wanted to be a part of this team. And they were a very special team, the ladies at Auckland Marist during that time. So, and then there's things like the subs, not being able to pay the fees for club. And I understand that there's a market difference between the New Zealand rugby system in Australia around fees. Mm-hmm. So it would be either asking your parents or coming up with creative ways to raise your funds for your fees, but it never hit what the amount is here in Australia. I was quite surprised at how much the club fees were here. And I actually don't know whether or not that crosses into... ours were probably like $50. Wow. It never would hit in the hundreds, that's for sure. Which in conversations that I've had with my colleagues here, it does hit in the hundreds. So, and I guess that's the difference between, rugby in Aotearoa is the number 1 sport, and in places like Melbourne it might be number 3 or 4. Are very rugby focused and have a real affinity to their local club. And for most Pacific Islanders coming from the islands to Auckland, for example, Ponsonby was probably the main club. So you'll find that there is a lot of families and that are invested in the club, and therefore they would support their their sons and now daughters who are looking at pursuing rugby as a sport or a hobby, or even as a profession. So I think those are probably the key challenges that I've come across. A number of young men that I work with are fathers, so those that are aware, the Rebels have been relocated to Canberra because of the cases of coronavirus here in Victoria, and some of them have had to, leave their families behind. So things like that, being able to still do what you need to do to put food on the table, but then you're leading afar, which does have its challenges. So I do take off my hat to those in professional sport that have had to make the sacrifice, like the Warriors have in NRL, to be away from families, to be able to support them financially from afar. So the challenges, I believe, back when I was playing in the 90s are not very different from the challenges now in 2020. I guess there's a lot more, I'd like to think there's a lot more support, and I guess it really does depend on the region what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just going back to some of the things that you touched on as well, it seems as though the issues are universal. So whether you're in New Zealand or you're here in Australia, the story around you travelling to training via public transport, I know for a lot of our youth girls, that is something that they do quite often. And, for us, because Australia is so geographically expansive, we have girls who are so committed that, perhaps Paul and Lisa who were coaching and managing them last year, probably witnessed this quite a lot. For our younger girls, they aren't driving. They are catching 3 or 4 trains, buses, a lot of the times just to play a game of sevens. So I think and so that sort of stuff will resonate with our girls as well. But definitely, and on what you were saying about a lot of players, and whether the Rebel players who are now having to live away from their family, I imagine that would be quite hard because as Islanders we thrive within the comfort of our family, the security of being at home. So I think that would be quite difficult for them. So in those situations, as your role, and I'm kind of just riffing now, in your role, how do you then support them? And I know you're not solely there to support Pacific Island players, but how do you, coming from this background, how do you support them, and what advice do you give them?
Well, a lot of my support at the minute is online.
Yep.
Because I obviously am in Melbourne. I'm part of the 10 postcodes that have had to go into localised lockdown. And so keeping in constant contact with them, making sure that I'm not bombarding them as well, because I need to be mindful that they are preparing for a game. So we've got game 2 this Friday against the Reds in Sydney. So it's meant to be a home game, but because of the cases here have changed the venue to, I think it's Brookvale Oval in Sydney.
Yep.
So a lot of the comms are definitely online. Some of our young men are doing some additional study just to keep themselves motivated, so ensuring that they're going okay with that. And in terms of liaising with their families, so my role is kind of twofold. Not only is it with the Rebel squad, but also their wives or partners and kids. So just ensuring that from a well-being perspective, that those that have been left behind are being taken care of. So whether it's in constant communication, we're looking at doing some food parcels for those that have families here, looking at some options around subsidised childcare. So things like that come part and parcel with the role, but also comes part and parcel with the club. I'm very fortunate to be with such a accommodating and a club that has love at its core, and family at its core. So the Melbourne Rebels have been really great in coming together and making sure that those that are in Melbourne that are away from their families are being looked after, despite their loved ones being interstate.
Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to move through because, like I said, I've got the free Zoom, so time is limited. So I'm just going to push through. So, what do you believe are the impacts what do you believe the impacts have been for the lives of a lot of our young Pacific Island players? And again, you're probably going back to some of the stuff that you'd already discussed.
So when you say the impacts, it's just in terms of, are you talking in terms of sport or like life in general, or?
I think if let's do both. Let's do both. So if we look at sports and the impacts, you talked about things like fees here in Australia. So whether, the impact of that is possibly that it might discourage players from continuing. In life in general as well would be good if we could get maybe some comments on
well,
that.
in terms of sport, like sport really for me has been a massive part of my life, even from when I was in primary school. I've always been involved in sport. And I think as young Pacific Islanders, women or men, girls or boys, we have a natural affinity towards sport. Not saying that all of our people are drawn towards sport, but those that do, there is a real sense of like team/family when it comes to your sports team or your club. And I find that has a positive impact on well-being, because they've got almost like a home away from home. And that's the reason why you'll find that when I talk about sports like netball and rugby, which are the two sports that I've been involved in, it becomes a family affair. So it's not only good for your health and good for your overall well-being, but you find that you end up making some lifelong friends through sport. And I can testify to that. Some of the women that I've played both netball and also rugby with, I've been to their weddings and baby showers, and that's the impact that sport can have on one's life. And it's interesting. So when Aotearoa was in lockdown, they were at level 4, and they were the first sport in, I think, globally that allowed crowds. And just the fact that the first games were sold out just shows how much people actually missed live sport and missed sport altogether, because with nothing on, there was nothing broadcasted. It was just replays. But there's something. Sport was a really great platform to be able to not only showcase your talent, but it's a really great way of being able to bring people together. So that's how I have been able to, I guess, experience it myself, the positive impacts of sport.
Yeah.
And also, for most cases, a lot of parents put their kid into, sport or music because, an idle mind is the devil's playground. So making sure that that our young people are being involved in something as opposed to nothing, because sometimes that nothing can turn into something really, really bad. So whether it be music, whether it be hobbies, whether it be sport, it's a great vehicle of being able to keep your mind engaged and keep, contributing to society in your very small way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think on what you're saying, so as part of the forum, what we had hoped to do was draw the connection between, playing rugby and then, how that could then, with the skills that you acquire, how you could then transfer those skills both into your life in general. So things, the playing as a part of a team, and so transitioning those skills into, how you then interact with people in school, in church, within your family, all that sort of stuff. I'm going to circle back to your role if I can. Can you talk us through your actual position title and then what the function of that role is?
Yeah, so I'm the player development manager, or player wellbeing and development manager, and my role reports actually directly to the Rugby Union Players Association.
Yep.
And so each Super Rugby club has a player development manager, and they basically deal with all of the off-field activities for the Super Rugby squad. So in my case, the Rebels. So we have like six pillars that we focus on. The high performance team, which includes the coaches, deal with all the on-field stuff. My role looks at all the off-field, and the pillars we really work on alongside the men. Mm-hmm. And some of our women actually as well, is around career and education, health and wellness, cultural awareness, financial management. There's also personal toolkit, which is around just like life skills stuff. So if they were wanting to look at maybe coaching and getting back to the community, and then ensuring that they have the right levels to be able to do that. They're working with kids, making sure they have their working with children, information all done. And then the other percentage of my work is working with the families and the partners and wives and their kids. So it's quite a broad role.
It's huge. And it's just the one of you.
Yeah, and it's really exciting. So Orny had alluded to the fact that I had been a team manager for a semi-professional rugby team for about 4 seasons back at home. So having worked in that space for 4 years, and then not long after that, I worked for a season with a short season or short campaign with Gangiwha Samoa Global Rapid Rugby, then also with the New Zealand Black Ferns Development 15 with Oceania last year in Fiji. To move into the welfare or the well-being space for me was a natural progression. We're in the a lot of Pacific Island people and also Māori are very much a collective community. We're about helping others, and that's essentially what my role is just ensuring that they say life after rugby, but I believe it's life during rugby, that the men that I serve are well equipped to be able to handle what happens if rugby was in March, we had no rugby for 6 weeks, was suddenly taken away from you. Yep. What else have you done? What else can you do to equip yourself to be a better citizen? So, and during that lockdown, a number of young men ended up taking up further study because they were at home. Others chose to do some online professional development courses. And others just spent more time with family because the nature of the work is they're away from family a lot. So it was a really crucial time and quite an important time to reconnect with their loved ones. So my role encompasses a lot of that stuff off the field, and it's definitely busy, especially with the situation that the Rebels are going through at the moment. But I don't think that I would want to be anywhere else. I'm really, really enjoying this season here in Melbourne, and especially with this role. I'm fortunate to have some great colleagues at the Rebels, but especially in Rupa, who I can lean on for support. And we have a great leader in Justin Harrison, who is based in Sydney, Toby Duncan and James Holbeck. And I think most have played either Super Rugby or have represented the Wallabies. So I'm in good company. And it's definitely, like you were saying, transferable skills. A lot of the skills that you learn on the field can definitely add value to life. And things around teamwork, working with others, being disciplined, self-motivation, when you aspire to wear in this case, the gold jersey, putting things in place, that definitely applies and translates to life. So I do encourage you to continue to do what you do, because you never know how it will impact you professionally when you're a little bit older, like I am.
Well, I'm still playing, and I'm probably the oldest one in the league at the moment. So, but yeah, no, absolutely. I think rugby, it really does. It offers you, without even knowing that it's providing you with those attributes. And it's not until you go away. And I think some of the things that you learn on the field, when you go to things like interviews and all that sort of stuff, and they will put those questions to you. Okay, well, tell us, what are your strengths? And then for our players, we want them to start thinking, okay, well, I work well under pressure. And you look at a 100%. Game scenario. So those sorts of things. 100% agree with you there. With regard to, staying with your role, you said that you'd provide support to the women as well, so the women Rebels team as well. Did you get much uptake for that? And have they been as responsive? Are you seeing there's opportunities there, given that you're relatively new, to do more in that space also?
There definitely is opportunity to do more. It's a little bit outside of my remit, but it's just I've been involved in women's sport for a very long time, so I definitely have a real heart for that. So have offered my services, and it has been taken, or taken up by some of the ladies, which is great. And my hope is to be able to work a little bit more with the women's and also with the academy squad. So that's kind of the long game.
Yep.
But for the interim, my front of mind is obviously making sure that I serve the Rebels to the best of my ability. But we'll always have an affinity and a love for women's sport. I am part of a collective that is called Tēnei Rugby, which crosses here in Australia, Hong Kong and New Zealand, and we've recently, during the lockdown, have come up with a telecast, so a spin on a podcast. And so I think we've got episode 7 tomorrow, where we've seen that there was a bit of a gap in terms of media coverage on Pacific and Island women in sport. And so our humble telecast has aired about 7 weeks ago, and we've just been highlighting a lot of our great women that are doing fantastic things, not only in rugby. We've had some netballers on the panel as well, and we're looking to expand into other sport, but we have a real way of being able to, we play sport a lot differently to the brothers, and because of that, there's a real flair that we provide, and would have come across that in your time playing as well, Oni. The thing is that we need to nourish and nurture that, and like you said, a lot of the skills and the values that you find in rugby teams can definitely translate into life quite easily.
No, absolutely. Mona, what else? What other advice would you give for our youth girls, given that the actual forum itself and the purpose and reason that we wanted to get this up? We go back to the incident that occurred in Brimbank, where we had unfortunately a lot of Pacific Island youths involved, where a young man unfortunately lost his life. And so we thought this would be a great opportunity for us to sit down, have real conversation with our girls about, not specifically that incident, but in terms of the after effects and the impact that was having, because I think there were a lot of people, and myself, I was one of them. I didn't know the young man, but it definitely hit home, because it's like, okay, well, what's going on now in our world that, we've got youths taking out other youths, but more specifically, because we're Pacific Islanders, well, what's happening in that space? So are you able, because I know you had been to the memoriams and had been a part of some of the programs that they're trying to roll out, but what has been your experience so far as a fallout from that incident, and where are we going?
Yeah, I definitely, there have been some really good conversations happening in the community space around how to deal post this untimely death of Solomone. And it's encouraging, to be fair. The memorial, the service that they had the week that he had passed was beautiful. Just the coming together of the different island communities, seeing young people there, all ages, to be fair. So we had representatives from the Cook Island, Niuean, Tongan and Samoan community, and it just showed the unity. And being very relatively new to Melbourne, I was really encouraged by that. It's quite normal back at home, but I was yet to actually experience the communities coming together here. Maybe I'm a little bit isolated from where everything is happening Pacifica-wise, but that in itself just showed that everyone was banding together, coming as one. And just the messages being said from the front were all around unity, don't hate, stop the violence, stop the gang fighting, and also just returning back to faith. And I don't know whether or not the young men that decided to do this to Solomone come from a faith background, but a number of organisations have come together who do work with youth, are doing some fantastic things in the community now. I think just before the localised lockdown here in our area in Brimbank, there were the Brotherhood from various communities were coming together and just there for a couple of hours in vis vests and making sure that the area was secure. That in itself was encouraging, and it was really powerful. Even the police had showed some presence there, and I had someone there from church who had gone there, happened to go at the same time. These two Pacific Island officers were there showing their support. So I know that there are some great things and positive things happening in the community. It really is encouraging. And my hope, especially for our young people, is that they know that these services are available, that there are people in your lives that are there that you can talk to and reach out to if you are still trying to process it. I understand that a number of the girls were connected to Solomone in one way or another, whether it be through school or otherwise. And it really is just reaching out, because there are people there that can help you through it.
Yep.
And there are other ways that we can channel some of our negative energy, whether it be through sport, through just talking it out. There's real power in talanoa.
Yep.
And then also just maybe just re-engaging in something physical, a positive physical, in terms of like going back to your trainings, pushing play. That kind of stuff will definitely help with managing your grief, because like you, I didn't know Solomone, but still grieved for him and his family, being part of our community. So I think that is very key for our young people is don't internalize, definitely reach out. And there are a number of people, whether it be online, whether it be through your club or your church or your networks, myself included, are there to kind of help you navigate through this grief process.
Fantastic. Yeah, and look, and you're right. I think, like I said, I didn't know him, but it was heartening to see that there was such an outpouring afterwards, and you see that the effects that it has on the wider community has been quite positive. So I think for our youth girls, you're right. There were a number of girls who knew him either through church, school, or were related. So I think this is always these forums and having the opportunity to talk. And, everything is always voluntary for us as well. So, but like you said, knowing that there are supports out there. And for us, and I know we are talking very generally, but to bring it back to, I suppose, using sport or rugby as a vehicle, to get some of that stuff out. And I'm simply echoing what you've said. It's to making sure that they know that, this is a safe place. This is an opportunity for you to get some of that stuff out. And there are a lot of positives that you can take away as being a part of a community within a community within a bigger community. So, but Moana, I think, was there anything else that you're wanting to maybe touch on just as we wrap things up? Any last pieces of advice? Anything we haven't covered up on?
I was just trying to. I think as Polynesians or Pacific Islanders, we're hardwired for relationship, and it's really, really important that regardless of what you're going through, that they're kind of just adding to what I just said just before, being able to nurture your relationships, because you never know where those relationships will head post, your teens. And I've experienced that with relationships that I've built when I was in my teens, and especially my university years, have actually helped me professionally now that I'm in, my 40s. So it's, we are hardwired for relationships, so nurture them. And definitely try and build a bridge, even with those that you might not like as much. I think it's really important. Kindness goes a very, very long way. And just being able to contribute rather than criticize. And I think if you are part of the solution, it's a lot better than trying to, fuel the fire in terms of the problem. So if there are any ways that your club, even if you've got some initiatives or things that you've got going in your head that you think that would add value to your girlfriends, your youth group, I definitely think it doesn't hurt just to put those thoughts to paper and see how you can really bring it to life. I think we underestimate the creativity amongst our young people, and I think we need to nurture that. And especially with the way that society is nowadays, if we can give them a platform to be able to be their authentic selves, as cliche as it sounds, whether it's through rugby, whether it's just through talanoa and future forums, I definitely think that, don't think that you don't have a voice, you do have a voice, and this is a safe place for you to share that. So I'm really encouraged. I can't wait to actually meet everyone in the flesh, especially our young people, and my hope is that this might be the first of many talanoa that we have here, especially within the Melbourne community.
Absolutely. Look, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate,
Welcome.
And what we'll do is, as you say, we will invite you back, hopefully to a face-to-face with our youth girls, and, we'll have them driving this conversation and, being the ones who are leading the discussion.
Awesome.
But thank you for your time. And what's the podcast that you're a part of? So if you want to give that a quick plug, and we'll put it up as well.
Oh, yes. So it's on Facebook, Teine Rugby, TEINE Rugby.
Yep.
And we have our telecast tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Melbourne time. So
No worries.
we've got we're interviewing a couple of Wellingtonians, a former Black Ferry and a former Marusina, and Jackie Patia Ferretti and Helen Collins. So yeah, come and join us.
Thank you. Thank you, Moana, for your time. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule today to chat.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you,
Right.
Oni.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.